Welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
If you're listening to us today and not watching on YouTube, you'll notice background noise that is nature. We got birds chirping because we're outside in nature on a wonderful summer evening during the summer solstice at the time of this recording. Today we want to talk about a concept that really goes back to the roots of the Myers-Briggs system, all the way back to Carl Jung and the Jungian concepts. We want to talk about persona today. And before we get into that, I just want to talk about, my son took me to a movie that came out recently. It was the movie about how the Air Jordan shoe came into be. So it's at the Nike company. That's where the movie takes place. It's a narrative. It's got Ben Affleck and Matt Damon in the movie, among other actors. And they're going through how they got Michael Jordan to come on board with Nike and sign a contract to have a shoe built around his basketball career. And obviously, everyone that lives now that can look back in time understands what happened since that happened in the mid-1980s. And I was watching this, realizing that when you're selling a tennis shoe, a basketball shoe, there's some functionality to it. I'm assuming that I don't wear Air Jordans. I've never had a pair of Air Jordans, but I'm sure there's some capacity. They probably help you perform better. But in a lot of ways, what you're buying is you're buying a lifestyle. You're buying a way of being. I think brands really do this. Brands give us a way to buy into a way of moving through the world and becoming. And I think that this is captured in a brand. We buy clothing. I mean, if you think about a brand, like cattle brand, like burning something into your skin to represent who owns you as a cattle, like a cow gets branded. We literally pay companies to cattle brand us, and we go and we represent them in the world. It's so weird that we do this as humans, but this happens. We embody different brands and different ways of wearing clothing and products and services and things. You know, Apple is one of these companies that does this too. It's got a very strong brand. Harley-Davidson, the motorcycle company. These are lifestyles, ways of being. And I was thinking about this week as we were preparing for this podcast, and I was thinking, well, that's really what a lifestyle or a brand is, in a way, is a persona that we're buying from a company. We're saying, I want to have a persona as I go through the world of an athlete that plays basketball at the highest levels. I want to have a persona of a power away from, you can't control me, Harley-Davidson motorcycle driver, right? I'm a rogue, I'm a misfit, I'm a renegade, if you will. So we take on these brands to kind of give ourselves a sense of how we're going to move through time and space. And I think that that's a good jumping off place for persona, because this concept can sometimes be difficult to understand. I think a lot of people think persona is the mask we wear. And although that's like kind of speaking to that, it almost has this connotation or this concept that it's the fake part of us. It's the part of us that's lying to other people. It's the part of us that's obfuscating the truth. It's the part of us that isn't being real. It's two-faced. I don't think that's really what persona means. So we want to talk about that today. What does this mean? How does it relate, maybe not to your specific personality type, but how does it relate to types in general? How can we be thinking about this? And what relation does it have to, like, Carl Jung's concept of the shadow, the ego, the whole self, all of these other ideas that he also talked about?
Yeah. Now I want to look up the etymology of the word brand.
Yeah.
Because you definitely piqued my curiosity. I was like, oh yeah, you're right. The way the other association I have for brand is a cattle brand. Mm-hmm. And there is something to be said for taking on, like, I'm not sure if I would 100% agree with the idea of paying companies to make us their property, but they are using our bodies as marketing, as advertising, of space. So, I don't think it's a ridiculous idea, but I do find that very interesting. And when you were talking about brands and this idea of persona, I think the one thing that could have a little bit more clarification in that is it's not just the way that I want to move through the world, it's the way I want other people experiencing me moving through the world.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you for adding that.
Yeah, because the persona is the interface between ourselves and the outside world. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of, I think people think persona means a mask of fakeness. And in part because that's where the term, because I do know the etymology of this one, originally comes from, which is theater masks, or like a fake face. But the concept of persona, because it is associated with fakeness, I believe people think that they need to get over it or transcend a persona or not have a persona anymore, which is actually, I think, unless you kill everybody on the planet, literally impossible, because you're always going to need to have an interface to the outside world.
Yeah.
So going to that idea of, well, does it have to be fake then, right? Like if a persona is a mask, and we have to have an interface with the outside world, do we always have to have a false front or a fake front in order to have a persona? Like, is that what that means?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the theater, you're talking about like Greek theater, right? With these masks, Greek or Roman theater. These masks weren't necessarily designed to be fake. They were designed to be performative, to be amplification, to, the sad, downturned face. So somebody, 100 yards back in a theater can see the emotion that this character is supposed to be embodying. It was a way of interfacing, quite frankly. It was to amplify the emotion. Modern cinema didn't exist yet. You had to go to the theater to see this performance. So it was this idea, like, and I think they even had special amplifications built into those masks to help the voice project too.
Yes.
When they're speaking.
Yeah.
So it was designed to help the audience resonate and see the character that this person's playing on stage.
Yes, exactly. So that old style, they call them like sock and buskin masks, the upturned face, the comedy and the downturned, the tragedy. Those, like you mentioned, those were not intended to not represent the character.
Yeah.
It was intended to represent the character writ large. Exactly. It's an amplification is the perfect word to use. Exactly. So our persona is not intended to not represent us. It's intended to amplify aspects of ourselves that we want to make sure that other people are experiencing of us.
But wouldn't it be weird if that character, the actor on that Greek stage or that Roman stage, left that mask on and then went to the market to buy fruit or meat for their family and then went home that night and kept that mask on around their family and their children? That would be a weird thing to do. And I think when people say that someone's being fake, that's actually what they're more speaking to, is that somebody never changes their mask. They're one note, or they're in a like an improper context. Like they're wearing the mask at home when you're around your kids. Why are you wearing a mask? You're not on stage performing. Why are you wearing this mask? Or I'm never going to take it off in any context. So it's either the wrong context or it's all context, if you will. So I think that's also something that as we think about this, we can start to think in terms of, oh, okay, so that person's not being fake in the context of the theater, but at home that would feel very fake. It'd be weird and fake for them to do that around their wife and children or their husband and children or something.
And if you have an overly curated persona, if you only allow people to interface with one aspect of you, if that's all people get to see, then it is like that. It is like never taking off the mask. And then you see pictures, of like a person who has like a happy face mask on and they pulled it off and they're crying underneath.
Yeah.
And I suspect a lot of people associate persona with a single mask you wear all the time or an inability to accurately represent oneself. But it's more like having, or at least it can be, a persona can be more than one mask. It can be access to many masks. In fact, it could be access to hundreds of them. You're looking for the one that more closely relates to your authentic self, that also is a good way to interface with the outside world for that context. So an overly curated persona, that's usually what we're pointing to when we say that person is fake. Right. And then we go, well, you're just wearing a mask, and that's what persona is. But persona, again, is just it's the interfacing element. So a person can have a lot of flexibility within their persona. It doesn't just have to be one aspect. There's millions of aspects inside of us, right? Or at least it feels like it. I guess millions might be an exaggeration. How many days, how many interactions have I had throughout my life? It's that many, right? It's at least thousands of different ways a person can show up. And so the reason why persona work is so important is that when we neglect our persona, when we don't put conscientious thought and effort into it, it can actually start to undermine us because we're not taking into real consideration how important it is for us to not just be our own person.
Yeah.
Or to just show up the way that everybody else wants us to show up. Both of these are extremes.
Yeah.
That both lead to bad results, actually.
Yeah. Well,
like no persona, quote unquote, no persona is just as bad as an overly curated single mask persona.
Well, I don't know if you can have no persona, but let's unpack this for a second. Okay, so what we're talking about is the person that's that one note. They're overly curated, no matter what context they're in. They're very much like, this is me, and it's a very tight framework.
Ding, usually.
Maybe it's a person in your life that is really well put together, never a hair out of place. They're always wearing the right clothes. Like, they might be curated in that kind of a fashion. Mm-hmm. And you go, oh, that's a person that's being fake. They can't always be that happy, that put together, whatever. They're curating that. I think you could see this in Instagram photographs, right? Mm-hmm. People curate like a slice. They take a quick picture, and then they they relax, whatever. But on the alternative to your point, somebody that goes into work maybe unbathed, their hair is not done, they're disheveled, they're not wearing like clothes that fit, and they would say, well, I'm not fake. This is the real me. You're not getting persona. You're getting the true person, all of me exactly how I am. And what I would argue is I think that's a persona just as much as the highly curated one. Yeah. I would say it's not a person that lacks persona. It's a person with an uncalibrated persona, just like the person that's overly dialed in, overly curated. It's just not curated at all, but you're still showing up and projecting and amplifying who you are to the world in that way.
Yeah.
As a person who doesn't care about those things.
Yeah, somebody's going to be like, well, what if they don't have access to things that will allow them to bathe? Meet us halfway. We're talking about somebody who does, all right.
They ostensibly went to work at a job, so hopefully they have resource to...
Yeah, well, sometimes people's circumstances change, and
we
want to acknowledge that, but
of course.
Meet us halfway. We're talking about somebody who's doing it as an attitude.
General principle.
Somebody who goes, I don't want to have to at all curate even the tiniest little bit of myself, and everybody else can accommodate me is effectively what you're talking about.
Yes.
So when we overly accommodate others, right, and we allow the outside world to not just show up for the context, but actually change our authentic self to meet the expectation of the outside world, that is one style of overly curated persona. Yeah. And that's when we lose self. We don't know who we are anymore. We're just showing up for everybody else. And then on the other side, and we're probably drilling this home just a little bit too much, but just to make sure we get the point, on the other side is the person who goes, no, everybody has to come to me, right? It's a very much everybody orbits around me sort of feel. And even if the person's like, well, then I just won't enter society. Well, that is a person who is rejecting the importance of persona.
I don't think you're hammering this home too much. I mean, if you look at this, if you look at something like Instagram, it's nothing but curated persona after curated persona after curated persona, like super dialed in at a slice of time. And I've noticed, especially young people, there's a few young people who have said, I'm not going to play that game. Mm-hmm. I'm going to kind of be the person that's not going to worry about the dialing it in. So I don't think you're hammering this home too much at all. I think this is actually something people have made a conscious choice around, although this is more honest than having everything put together. It's more real. It's more genuine. Yeah. When it's still in a reaction to something else, it's still, you're not really being real in those moments. I think I cut you off, by the way. Sorry about that.
No, I'm glad you said that. No, as usual.
You're on a run. I just realized.
No, I'm glad you said that because I do think it's a reaction. And here's why persona is so important. Dr. John Beebe, who is really been a massive inspiration for me to understand Jung's work with a lot more complexity than I ever did before. John said that the reason why the persona is so important is because it sets us up for life. It sets us up for life. It helps us find a place in society. It helps us understand how to play nice with others. A lot of times, these people who are reacting against Instagram fakeness or whatever you want to call it, the overly curated, quote-unquote fake, persona, a lot of times they have things that are really important to them that they want to accomplish in life, but they struggle. How do I make this happen? Sometimes it starts out with huge dreams, like how do I make these things are super important to me. Maybe these causes or maybe this goal or this priority list is super important to me, but I just can't seem to ever figure out how to make it happen. What's wrong? What's happening here? And oftentimes that big, that reactionary, damn the man, you can't tell me who I am, bleeds over into an incapacity to use one's persona to set themselves up for life, to go interface with the world in a way that plays nice enough to build the resources, to clock the time, to build the network, to create whatever resources are necessary in order to get accomplished the things you really want to get accomplished. And that's what the persona is supposed to do. It's not supposed to teach you how to just be a good little citizen. It's supposed to teach you how to interface so that you can persuade and that you can inspire and you can, support yourself and not require other people to support you because you can't figure out how to set yourself up. The persona is really crucial, particularly when we're young, to figure that piece out.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a flexibility here that you're speaking to. This idea that you enter the world in a real way. You don't just have to curate how you present, but you also don't have to curate your experience. You can enter the experience and then adjust your persona as you go, rather than knowing exactly what experience you're about to enter and making sure your persona is ready to meet that with the proper curation.
I think you see a lot of examples of what you're talking about with people who need to have be in a digital comfort zone before they're in a reality comfort zone.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm speaking to. Well, not that specifically, but that is the example of something I'm talking about, where you're trying to curate, you're trying to proactively curate not just how you show up, but the environment you're about to enter. You're also trying to control the space you're about to enter, because it makes it easier for you to curate your persona if you can control the space you're about to enter.
And control all the people who are going to be there or
Correct.
paying attention to you.
Correct.
Like, I've noticed that it's almost becoming like an assault if somebody interacts with you and you weren't expecting them to.
Yeah.
Like, hey, how you doing today? And the person's like, I'm in my headphones and I'm not interacting and engaging with the outside world. And yet there's so much curation of one's identity on social media.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. I think even people who get this attitude, like younger people maybe, I don't know, I don't want to pick on younger people because older people, we have our problems with persona too. But it's this idea that unless I know exactly what I'm walking into, I don't know how I'm supposed to show up. There's no flexibility there. And sometimes it's because I don't know the part of myself that's the right interface for this context. Mm-hmm. And yet everybody's persona is developed through trial and error.
Yeah.
We all have to mess up. We all have to show up to a situation, bring the wrong part of us forward, the wrong part either for the context or it was great for the context, but we went away feeling icky about it. Like we're like, oh, that I wasn't really my honest self there.
Yeah.
Everybody has to have a whole bunch of those daily experiences of bringing the wrong part of themselves forward, or a slightly off part, or engaging and interacting in an awkward way that makes you not feel so good. Everybody needs a ton of those in order to cycle through all these different versions and variations of themselves until it starts to land, until you start to bring forward the part of yourself that's the right part of yourself for the context, and you feel good afterwards, and so do other people in your presence. But it's trial and error for persona. Right? Just like acting is trial and error, right? Anytime we're trying to amplify something, it's trial and error. It's a lot of messing up before you get good at it. And I suspect we think that our persona is something we're supposed to naturally be good at just immediately, right? We're supposed to know who we are and be our authentic self and show up as our authentic self and never make any mistakes. In the same way that we're supposed to just naturally know how to be parents or just naturally know how to partner up. Like, this is just a natural part of life, right? It's primordial. So because of that, I should just come with all the skills. I shouldn't have to every single day mess up as a parent and eventually figure out, oh, I think I know what I'm doing now that they're in their teens and I've already made all my mistakes. Or I'm just supposed to know how to partner. I'm not supposed to be making day after day after day mistakes with my, the person I'm coupled with. I'm supposed to just know how to do this. And I think we believe the same thing is the case with our persona. Yeah. And because it's harder than we expect, we tend to go to those two different polarities. Overly curated for the outside world, or demanding the outside world come to us, because the middle ground is really hard to master. Yes. It's very difficult.
I don't think that it's just a modern problem. I mean, I think that people have been dealing with this for a long time. But I would say that it is a modern challenge for us to have to do it on our own and figure this out on our own without a lot of help. Because, if you think about just the recent past, even just pre-internet 50 years ago, maybe even pre-media to some degree, but mostly media, there were a lot of markers of what my persona was supposed to be, right? And I think there's a little bit of pushback against this. Say, well, I don't want to just be one note. I'm in this context. Maybe I'm not designed to be partnered up and have children, and that's the societal expectation of my persona. Should be a mom or a dad or something, and we're reevaluating those things. But unfortunately, with the breakdown of these natural, I would say like archetypical or
like
roles that we play, with society kind of going postmodern and not having them available to us as readily just to plug ourselves into, we're having to really do some mindfulness and thinking. But I don't think people are doing the mindfulness and thinking. They're just going, oh God, and they're just getting more reactionary and they're just copying what they see. And I think it's getting worse because we're put under so much pressure to figure it out on our own. We can't just go, my persona is that I'm a Presbyterian dad of 3 children that drives this car. That you have all these markers of society from the past.
Here are my flags on Twitter.
Yeah, so now it's like it's a lot more about identity and what causes we support and the things we care about and all of that. It became much more about our values than anything. And so, it's not just about our interests or the things that we want to do. It's also about what we value and what we care about, which I think is a good thing. I love values. That's where that's the water I like to swim in. But it does make it more challenging to figure this out. And I think it's getting more challenging for us to know what to do about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And we are in a little bit of an all bets are off around roles and around identity and that sort of thing. I agree that that's the case. And I believe that persona work should still be focused upon thoughtful, conscientious persona work. Because John calls the persona the counterweight to the shadow.
Dr. John Beebe.
Mm-hmm, yeah. And so if we don't do sufficient persona work, if a person goes, well, that's stupid and, I shouldn't have to not wear my pajamas to Walmart or whatever, it's like there's so many people I see out and about engaging with the rest of society that are literally in pajamas.
Yeah. Are you judging neutral things, Antonia?
Well, people get to do that, but the question is the context that this is pajama time, right? You're engaging with other people who got up and got dressed for the day, and you just rolled out of bed and decided that pajamas were the right call for all contexts, which in my mind, I'm like, you're not going to go back to bed in those, are you?
Oh, yeah.
It's super gross. Like, the whole point is, like, there's a reason the robes exist. It's so that the world doesn't get on your clothes and you crawl into your bed sheets. I don't know. This is maybe I'm a little judgy about that, but there's like a well, the rest of us are acting as adults. The rest of us are adults. We're not adulting. We're not like pretending. We're not holding on to and gripping to our childhood, right, as tightly as possible while we are in the time period of setting ourselves up for life, of trying to make an impact in our world. Not a big impact, not save the world impact, but like get a job and pay our bills and maybe have a rewarding relationship. And if I want to have a family, that's something I'm now qualified for, right? Yeah. And so there's this sense that, and when you said you're judging neutral things now,
well, I want to push back on something just to make it distinct, because somebody younger might feel like you're picking on them. You're like, you're supposed to be an adult now, and we're adulting here. Don't be a child clinging to childhood. Well, I mean, you could say that for a middle-aged man in his 50s, wearing Star Wars stuff and like really clinging to maybe a past. Like, it's not just wearing pajamas to like the store. It could be like, you could maybe say that about like collecting toys into your 50s or 60s. Like, I mean, are you saying that that's, I guess I just want to get more clarity on that, because like, would you say those people are clinging to childhood, for example? Right? Like, because they would say, well, I'm a collector. I'm an adult. I do adult things. I just collect these because they are a representation of my childhood.
Yeah. When I say clinging to childhood and the marker being wearing pajamas, I don't mean clinging to aspects of having like an eternal child part of us.
Yeah.
Because a persona has space for that too, right? There is an eternal child part of us, and there are times and situations where it's totally contextually appropriate to bring that out. Like if you're If you're a middle-aged man and you're super into Star Wars and you're like, I'm going to go do whatever's the most expensive Disney World package to just swim in Star Wars paraphernalia, and I'm going to drop as much money as humanly possible, and I'm going to get all the things, and I am going to have my own, custom-made lightsaber, and I'm going to have all the things. Well, that's the context for it, but where'd the person get the money to do it? From their job. Does their job allow them to come in,
with a lightsaber?
With a lightsaber? I mean, maybe it does. Maybe they're in like this environment where everybody's like, bring your lightsaber on Monday because we're all going to want to talk about it.
I work on the Death Star.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, but that person, are they paying their bills? Are they being responsible for the things they need to be responsible for? And when I see somebody who goes shopping midday in their pajamas, I don't see somebody who is fit for life. Like they might be. Maybe it's me being super judgy. I don't know. Somebody's going to be like, I'm wearing my pajamas all the time and I'm like the CEO of some Fortune 500 company. I don't know. But that's not the impression I'm getting as the interface of them. If they're amplifying a part of themselves, they're not amplifying the responsible part that makes me think, oh, I can rely and lean on this person. Yeah. They're amplifying the part of themselves that just doesn't want to have to take a shower, right? Or like get in clothes for that day. So the persona, again, is the amplification of a portion of ourselves. We're not talking about like me looking at the person and going, that's all you are. You're just a pajama wearer. Yeah. I'm saying this is the part of you that you have chosen to amplify when you engage and interact with society. Yeah. And so I'm gonna believe you. Yes. Right? When you're amplifying this part of you, I believe you. And so I'm gonna interface with you based on all the things that go along with somebody who isn't willing to take the 10 minutes to put on a pair of jeans. Yes. Right?
So I just want to, again, because I know someone's listening, maybe having a challenge with some of the things you're saying. So I'm kind of representing almost maybe another viewpoint from yours. Mm-hmm. You are not trying to say that anyone that goes through the world representing themselves in any way they decide that's like bad and wrong, because you are coming from a very Western achievement framework, like about success and about job and career. You have but it's about you come from that culture. I do too. We have a very American Westernized view of this, but a lot of people don't necessarily have that same view of what the markers of success or proper persona would be. There's all sorts of, even just inside of our own country or experience of culture. Sure. There's a variety of people that want to display different personas. So the person wearing their pajamas that comes to the store may not have your framework at all that's successful, that I should be an adult and I should be moving through the world. And, I would say to that person, well, you're going to get the results of how you show up, whatever context or society or culture you show up to. That culture has a tone. There's often reward systems inside of it, and you can fight against them, but that's just the reality of how it works. And I personally believe that person has the right to do whatever they want to do and how they show up. Yes. As long as they don't force other people to have to accommodate it radically, like in a way that's hurtful to those other people. Yeah. Do what you want.
Yeah, I'm really glad you gave pushback because I can pivot very easily on that. Sure. And you're right. I come from the society in which I was raised, and so I'm part of what that person is interacting and engaging with, right? Yeah. They're interfacing with me and people like me. Now, I suspect the reason why persona work is difficult for people is because they don't want to be judged. Yeah. They don't like the idea of being judged. You can't judge me. That is very idealistic. Whether or not a person believes they should or should not be judged, they are being judged. That's just how that's what we do. We judge each other. Now, that doesn't mean that we're judging harshly or that we're judging things that, like are a person's right to have, although we do that too all the time. But society as a collective is constantly and perpetually making very quick judgment calls on each other because life is busy and we got a lot to do, and I can't stop and get to know absolutely every single stranger as if this person is my future best friend. Right. Yeah. I have to make very quick judgment calls. I have to determine who I'm going to get close to and who I'm going to push away, who I'm going to hire and who I'm going to ignore, who I'm going to partner with and who is going to become a friend of mine and who needs to get as far away from me as possible.
And this is why we love type, because it gets out of all the stereotypes and markers that we use that are terrible. We can use something way more way better, understanding someone's cognition, understanding who they are as a person.
Exactly. And type is very helpful, but type will not create a persona for you. Yeah. right? Unless you're actively using type to create a persona, which some people do, right? I am an ENTP, so I'm going to do all the things that I've read online that ENTPs do.
Yeah.
And then when other people look at me, they'll see me as the stereotypical ENTP, and they'll never say that I'm not an ENTP. And it's like, well, then I'm just dancing for their expectation. I'm still being judged, right? And so I guess you could do that too. But no matter what personality type you are, you still have to create a persona for yourself. And knowing one's type preferences help, right?
Yeah.
It helps because you get to know yourself a little bit better. You sort of understand yourself. You have all these access points to get, I think I'm, as a person who uses extroverted intuition or exploration as my driver or dominant function, that kind of makes sense why other people experience me as a chaos agent. But am I a chaos agent? And is that what I want to communicate to everybody? Is that what I want to amplify? That if I enter your life, I'm just going to create, I'm going to be like a Tasmanian devil that just creates, all of these spinning things and you can't tie me down? Of course not.
Yeah.
Right? Even though a person say they're probably an ENP, right? I'm going to want to show up giving myself the best shot I can of opportunities and to live a life that I think is rich and filled with good relationships and, enough resource to accomplish the things I want to get accomplished and have the impact I want to have. That means I'm going to have a better persona.
Yeah.
And a big piece of that is getting to know a lot of aspects of myself. A lot of aspects, so that when the context changes, I can bring out a different part of who I am and amplify that. Not a fake part, not a part I don't identify with, but a part that I've made peace with and gone, this is me too. This is part of who I am. And so when the situation goes, it could probably use this part of who you are, I can bring it out, I can display it, I can interact and engage, and I don't feel fake because that's me too. That's a part of who I am.
Yeah, let's go back to this concept of the counterweight to the shadow, because we've been talking about the shadow often in some of our programs, like our Personality Life Path program, our Profile Training, but we've also been talking about the podcast, some of our live podcasts we've just done in some recent cities. We've talked about this, and I think the persona is kind of like, persona, whatever, but let's get to the real stuff, the ego and the shadow. That's the real juicy stuff. That's the real meat of the conversation. It's like, whoa, back up for a second. There's a relationship that the shadow and ego have with the persona. And often what we can find is, I think one of the best ways to find shadow material for us is to get triggered. Like that's one of the key things that we can do. And you notice people that have really tight curated personas. It's a trend. It's not a rule, but I've noticed those folks are some of the ones that can get triggered the easiest. Like anything that's out of where they can show up in that particular thing, they don't know what to do. And sometimes that can trigger, and then some shadow material can jump in there, and I'm like, whoa, what just happened with this person? Yeah. So that's been my personal, again, experience from my viewpoint. And so let's talk about more of that relationship. How can we think about that as humans, as we're moving through? My persona and my shadow ego they're in relationship to each other.
I think that's one of the most fascinating aspects of persona. In fact, I don't think that I was really as fascinated by the concept of persona until I realized it was a counterweight for the shadow. And because I was fascinated by shadow work too, aren't we all?
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, getting triggered, well triggered. Like, you're not allowed to do that to me, and you just said something, and I'm really upset, and it was all your fault. That is shadow material. Shadow material, as we mentioned recently, isn't going into a dark room and crying. That's not the shadow. The shadow is you said something and I am projecting all of my bad stuff or all the stuff not even bad, all the stuff I haven't made peace with about myself. I'm projecting it onto you. You're the bad guy now because you're making me see the stuff about myself I don't want to see. So the shadow is effectively, it's not just our unconscious, it's the unconscious that we don't want to see it, right? That's what shadow material is. It's a bunch of stuff we're unconscious around and we don't want to look at. So how is the persona and the shadow a counterweight for each other? Well, like you mentioned, a person who has to control their environment usually has a pretty one-note persona, right? Because they're using their persona, their interface with the environment to get the environment to respond to them in as equally a curated way. Like you can kind of instinctively tell when somebody can't handle much, if I say this little thing, they're going to flip out or they're going to go off the rails, or if things don't go the way they want them to, they're going to react in a way that I don't really want to have to deal with. And so they're, that maybe they're just really sensitive or just super fussy or whatever. Okay. So you've got people who they're curated because they have to control the environment to make sure that nobody ever triggers the stuff they don't want to see. They can't handle anything they haven't made peace with. So when your persona doubles down on something, right? It goes, well, it's your problem, not mine, if you can't interface with me. So I get to do whatever. I get to wear pajamas everywhere I go, and that's your problem, not mine. That's fine. You're totally allowed to do that. The challenge is when the environment goes, you probably shouldn't be wearing pajamas. It is very common for people like that to get offended, right? You can't tell me what to do. It means that there's a part of themselves that they haven't made peace with, the part of themselves that goes, maybe they have a point, right? Because every single one of us has the part that wants to go in pajamas that day, and every single one of us has a part of ourselves that wants other people to respect us and see us as a powerful person in the world.
Again, don't get too latched on the pajamas specifically. Get the concept.
Yeah, you're just really worried that our audience is filled with pajama wearers.
I see so many people in pajamas now that I know somebody's listening right now going, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Are you saying, whatever.
Well, you mean I'm triggering them?
Possibly. And I guess here I'm running to protect.
Yeah.
I'm running to protect. I'm like, oh no, don't trigger anybody.
And hey, I want clarity of idea too.
Yeah.
I don't want people to not hear what we have to say because they got triggered. But if a person's getting triggered, it's because their shadow content is coming out.
Yeah.
That's what's happening.
Yeah.
The part of them that goes, maybe she has a point, is coming up, and they haven't contended with it. They haven't contended with the part of themselves that wants more or wants to show up in a more powerful way, a way that demands or commands respect from others, a way that shows that they really want to, that they care, right? So that's on the one side, and the other side is the ding, smile, has to always constantly, perpetually be doing everything for everybody else. There's a ton of stuff inside those people, too, that they just really don't want to contend with. Usually it's the part of themselves that's kind of nasty and mean, right? If you have to be nice to everybody all the time and nobody can ever hate you, it means that you haven't contended with the part of you that is kind of a bit of a nasty beast, right? So when we overly curate a persona, whether it's an attitude or whether it's total compliance, it doesn't matter. It means that a part of the act is don't reflect back to me a bunch of stuff I don't want to see yet. And what's the stuff we don't want to see? It's the shadow. So when our personas are too curated, regardless of why or what's living underneath them, it means a bunch of stuff that we could be looking at, contending with, bringing from the shadow into the ego, into consciousness. It means all that stuff stays there because we don't want anybody triggering it. So the more stiff, one note, the more attitude and inflexibility one has in their persona, the more content they have in their shadow. It's like a one-to-one correlation. But if a person is willing to go through the hard work of showing up as authentically as they can, authentic, while at the same time recognizing that they're not the only person on the planet and they have to interface. So they show up authentically, but with flexibility, recognizing that the context also needs something from them.
Yes. Playing
well, right? Or maybe being competitive. Who knows? Whatever the situation requires. And they make mistakes and they get triggered. And they go, okay, getting triggered is not the worst thing in the world. What did I just get triggered around? Oh, there's this part of myself I didn't know before. I'm gonna go make peace with it. Maybe I said something really stupid. Maybe I was on stage. I remember this moment. I think I was 12 or 13 years old and I was giving a talk in front of like 150 people. And the entire time I was so nervous, my vocal cords were vibrating like crazy, right? I was kind of talking like this because, and I was just so nervous. And afterwards I had to contend with the fact that I had just humiliated myself in front of an enormous room full of people.
Yeah.
And I had to just sit with it and go, did this change how everybody saw me? Is everybody going to think I'm incompetent? And I sat with it long enough to go, well, it happened, so I guess I'm going to live. And guess what? I did live.
Yes.
And the next time I gave a talk, I did a better job because I wasn't so just completely overwhelmed by the ramifications of what if I don't do this well, because I didn't do it well the time before. I showed up not well. My persona was not terrible. My persona was trying, right? I showed up as a young person trying.
You were training it.
That's right. I was training my persona. And the next time I did a much better job because I didn't die the previous time. And so all this stuff about myself, how much I cared about other people's opinions of me, how much I had like even as a preteen or a teenager, I was like, man, I'm really handing a lot over to other people, aren't I? And I had to contend with all that. I care what people's opinions are. What's the thing you say as a teenager? I don't care what anybody thinks. I don't care about anybody's opinion. Well, that was a moment when I had to go, clearly I do. Clearly I care about everybody's opinion. And so I had to sit with that. And I had to realize that was a part of who I am. And the next time I could just own it and go, yeah, I get really nervous at these talks.
Yeah.
Right? I get really nervous and I'm not that great. So I guess I should probably keep building skill.
Yeah.
So when a person's persona is flexible, when they go through trial and error, when they recognize like, no, there's a part of me that wants to look awesome. There's also a part of me, by the way, it's not like I've never gone anywhere in pajamas.
What? Antonia,
What?
the truth comes out now, folks.
The truth comes out.
If you're listening along, take note. She's judging things she's done herself.
She was just hiding the entire time. This terrible thing she's done. No, of course I've done that.
You didn't get in bed afterward, did you, later on?
I did not. Okay. I did not do that.
Because I would really think less of you now if that was the case.
And rightly so. But I mean, I've done that because there's a part of me that wants to do that too.
Yeah.
And there's some situations. I think I was like really sick one time and I had to go get cough medicine and I was just like, I barely got myself there and I bought some cough medicine. I came home. Was that a time I was okay? I thought so. It's fine.
Yeah.
And when you have a flexible persona and you can be different, you can be yourself in a variety of contexts and you can allow that test iterate to not always make the right choice, not always have the best judgment of that interface. Sometimes have beautiful judgment, but the outside world still gives you pushback, right? It's still, it punishes you for being real or whatever, which is also a thing that happens. Then a bunch of shadow stuff, all that stuff that gets triggered, you get a look at it and go, maybe it's not something that needs to stay in the shadow. Maybe I can contend with it. And then suddenly your shadow is small. Your persona is big. It's varied. It's flexible. It's beautiful. And you can tell people who've done persona work because when you're around them, they have a calming energy.
Yeah.
You just feel really chilling around them because you're not constantly trying not to step on landmines of triggers, right?
Yeah.
You know the person's going to be able to relax and be able to handle it.
Be able to handle whatever comes up for them. So one of the things that I have noticed in our world is I think on a societal level, we do have a shadow problem. I think a lot of like generations, each generation has a shadow of itself. People have shadows themselves. Social groups and causes have shadows. Like any political persuasion or perspective or social perspective, everything's got a shadow to itself. But I would argue that we actually have a worse persona problem or challenge in our world than we do shadow challenge or problem.
I think they're related.
I think we have both, but here's why I think we have a persona challenge is because in order to do shadow work like we've been talking about, the persona is so key. And we know from Carl Jung and some of the ways that he worked with clients and all the Jungian analysts we know that midlife is a huge part of shadow work. And there's some shadow material that just simply isn't available to people. They don't have enough life experience or hardship or trauma or whatever to deal with, like they have enough to work with. I mean, there's plenty to work with when you're young, but there's like some deeper truths and deeper things to work with in midlife that emerge naturally at that time period. And if you haven't been doing persona work and that emerges, you're going to be double in trouble. Because I think when you're younger, when we're setting ourselves up for life, I have 2 teenage sons right now and a daughter who's 10, going to be 11 soon at the time of this recording. I think they're all about persona work right now. I mean, there's getting triggered and they're having to deal with like deeper shadow stuff, but really they're working on, okay, what face am I going to show them at work? My oldest son, 17, he's asking that now. How am I going to, I mean, he's not asking that out loud, but that's what he's going through right now. How am I going to show up to the family, to work, to my mom versus my dad versus my friends at my home down there versus my friend, like all these things he has to kind of figure out. I think he's doing a good job, and I think that's the work of young people. I think when you're younger, you get to kind of figure these things. That's what our 20s are for, our teens and 20s often. And yeah, we get triggered and some shadow stuff comes up and we have to deal with it, but there's going to be some deeper shadow work coming for people that are younger in midlife. If you're in midlife and you haven't done a lot of persona work, you're probably very struggling right now. You're probably having a challenge of like, man, not only do I have to like figure out all this shadow stuff that's surfacing, but now I got to try to figure out how I'm presenting myself in a way because I never dialed that in, or I only dialed it in one way, and now I don't know how to change and be different as this content's coming into my life. So I think there's And then obviously when you get older, there's a whole nother set of challenges in elderhood and all of that. But I think there's an opportunity right now for us in our world to work on our personas.
Yeah.
And I think you and I have been turned on to this idea that I think it's way more significant than we thought.
Yeah.
It's not to be dismissed like, yeah, persona, whatever. It's like, no, this is like part of maybe the first 30 to 40 years of your life is around this work.
Yeah.
And I think that people that have done that work probably aren't getting triggered and they don't have as much shadow stuff by the time they get to their midlife.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that midlife stuff comes from not dialing in your persona up to that point.
Yep. Yeah. So before we wrap up, I think it's good to know what are the kinds of questions I can ask myself in order to really start to develop my persona. And especially if you struggle a little bit with it. So the first question is, what do I want other people to know about me? Right? That doesn't feel like a persona question, right? It feels like, it's like, well, I want them to know that I'm super into Air Jordans is not really the answer, right? Even though that might be part of your persona, you're communicating a value there, which is fine. But if you do things like wear certain brands, what is it that you want people to know about you based on those brands, right? Or how you dress. I never wear brands ever, ever, ever. So
because you don't want to be owned by a company.
Actually, that's not true. I wear Converse shoes quite often, so I guess that's a branding, but because it's very iconic. But yeah, because I don't want to be owned by. I don't want to be free walking advertising, I guess. But there's nothing wrong with it. I don't think there's anything wrong with communicating that you're loyal to a certain brand. But what is it that you're trying to communicate, right? What's the specific thing that you want other people to know about you? And that's not just ego work. That's not just know thyself work. That's interfacing work, because you can be very clear about your values and then be constantly frustrated that nobody understands this about who you are. So if you have any problem with communicating the things that are important to you, communicating what you're about, communicating like the things that you really wish the outside world would just acknowledge and respect. And I don't buy this whole I don't care what other people think thing. I don't buy any of that, because of course we do, because we're humans and that's humaning. We all care what other people think about us. We all care about other people's judgment because our survival is based on it.
Yeah, strip away all the resource and you certainly will quickly care about what other people think if you're dependent on them for food or something.
That's right, exactly. And even if it's you only have to give the bare minimum, you still have to give the bare minimum. So what do you want other people to know about you? What parts of yourself do you feel are not, they don't commonly come out, but they do, and where can you give space for them to come out? Like I remember when I was really starting to get into these goddess archetypes, and I think archetypes are an interesting way to do this. I realized I'm more aligned with like the Aphrodite archetype. This is, by the way, if you've not listened to the podcast, we did a whole series on gods and goddesses and every woman and every man, and talked about these god and goddess archetypes. When I realized I was aligned with Aphrodite, I was like, well, I think actually Aphrodite is a part of how I kind of want to dress, right? And I want to show up. So I started moving a little bit more sensually than I have before. It doesn't really come out in this context, because in this context you get my total and you get my brain, right? You get all my introverted thinking. And so that's not a very sexy part of who I am. But in other time periods, I like want to bring out a little bit more of that flair and that flavor. It's important to me to have that as part of who I am represented.
But wouldn't it be weird to bring that persona to this context?
It would be totally
like,
inappropriate.
Like a string bikini, a little more sensual, and like jewelry and adornment, and you're like, hey, what's up?
Yeah. Well,
It'd be a whole different podcast.
I'm not the age for that, and that's a totally different vibe. But I have seen...
But that's an example of the kind of the persona difference. That's not you being fake in this context.
Right.
Right? This is actually you, but that Aphrodite, more sensual part is also you, too.
Yeah.
But it's more contextual. That's
right. I do that in different space. So what are the parts of yourself that you identify with, but you're not bringing out at all, right? Not just things that you wish other people knew about you, but things that you wish you were representing with more integrity. Yeah. And how can you bring them out? And then how can you bring them out and feel really weird about it, but still do it anyway? Like, I felt super weird about doing this one night, but I went shopping one night and I dressed as sexy as I possibly could, and it felt super weird. Like I was wearing high heels, I was wearing like a short skirt, and I'm like, I'm shopping. at like our local market. And I'm like, I don't feel comfortable here, but I had to try it on. I had to try it. I was like, I've never allowed myself to do this, but I did. And I was like, you know what? That's not really it. But I think I'm going to bring some stuff from this forward. Like there were things about it that I was like, okay, that wasn't quite it, but I think I've learned something about myself and how I want to interface with the outside world. So are you taking chances, right? Are you bringing stuff outside? And, I'm talking about Aphrodite and sexiness and stuff, but that was mine. That's because I was raised in an environment that didn't allow me to do any of it. And yet here was this big part of myself that was identifying with it. Mm-hmm. So that means that I had not had the courage to bring that aspect of myself out, and I needed to do that. So what part of yourself requires some courage to present forward? And it might not end up being your ultimate. It might not end up being the thing that you always want to present, but you might learn something from it and go, okay, these are the parts of me that I want to bring out. Now, you're going to set yourself up to get triggered, right? If you're dressed in a certain way, in a certain context, somebody might go, I mean, if I had been around my brother, he'd have been like, you look like an idiot, right? And I know that. And it would have been very deeply triggering to me.
Yes.
And we went out to dinner with my brother recently, and I dressed like a rock star, right? Like, sort of shiny leather pants and like the whole thing. And he didn't say a word. And it's because I owned it. And I owned it because I had been working on owning it. And now it's a part of my persona, right? And he's like, you look like a rock star. But he didn't say, like, you look like an idiot, which is what I totally was expecting from him. So what are the parts of ourselves that we're tamping down? What do we want other people to know about us? What's the flexibility that we can have? And where am I getting triggered and not allowing myself to get triggered, that I need to allow myself to get some of that feedback? I need to own it. I need to understand that this is a part of who I am. Yeah. And I need to bring that into my self-awareness and self-understanding, and then go, and then is this also a part of how I'm going to interface with the outside world?
So in summary, what do I want other people to know about me? What parts of myself do I feel I need space to emerge? What parts of myself need some permission or courage? And where am I not allowing myself to get triggered?
And what do I want? And what aspects of myself do I need to bring out to get closer to getting what I want? Now, you mentioned, I was talking about it in a very like get a job sort of way, but this could easily pivot to relationships. Yeah. Right? Like, are you showing up in a way that is conducive to getting the relationships you want?
Well, if they want me, they can accept me for exactly how I am.
Yeah.
Somebody might say. And I think you're pushing back on that concept. Like, if they can't accept me exactly how I am, I'm not changing myself for nobody.
Yeah.
Kind of like I'm using bad grammar on purpose. That's the statement. It's like, I'm not changing for no one.
Yeah.
I think that's an attitude people might have in the dating world, for example, and that might be a persona issue.
Yep.
Is what you're positing.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I think I read someplace where it's like, if you can't take me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best. And it was like, maybe. What is your worst, right? And what's your best? Like, there's a lot of this, like, you have to come to me language, and it's like, well, or you have to interface with the outside world and understand that there are reasons why people are attracted to the things they're attracted to. And you might have as much idealism as you want and go, a person should take me for whoever I am, just 100% me. But what if 100% you is not a very attractive partner? Like, do you just go, oh, I guess I die alone? Maybe that's the hill you'll die on, like both figuratively and literally. Or you can go, okay, there are aspects of myself that I could bring out that are probably more conducive to being attractive. I just have to go find them, right? And what is it about myself that's making it a challenge? And I don't mean dress a certain way necessarily, right? But maybe that's it. Maybe you need to start dressing in a way that is also honest and authentic to you, but is more appealing to the outside world. Or maybe it's your demeanor. Maybe you need to be a little bit more open, right? Maybe it's a sense of openness or whatever. There are things that we can do without betraying who we are, right? Betraying our identity to the marrow of our bones, that interface in a better way with the outside world. And the thing is, you don't have to. You don't have to do any of this, right? You can just be whoever, like, you can just go, I'm not changing myself for anybody. That's fine. And I'm not even suggesting that people change themselves. I'm suggesting that people find aspects of themselves that they can bring out in different contexts. That's a very different idea. But you can just plant a flag and go, this is who I am, and I'm not changing, and everybody has to accommodate it.
I'm wearing pajamas, damn it. And no one's going to tell me not
Nobody's
to,
gonna
Antonia.
tell me. Nobody's going to tell me not to wear
someone might
pajamas.
say.
That's right. And that's fine. And then don't be surprised if, number one, you have a hard time setting yourself up in life. And number two, you have a ton of shadow content that's coming for you in midlife.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I'm a little bit ranty about this, aren't I?
Yeah, you are. You're hearing some background noises. We're once again outside, just so you know. There've been background noises this whole time. Airplanes, there was some gun shooting, there's a horn honking, children yelling. We're in rural Pennsylvania at the time of this recording, so that's what all that noise is.
All right. So is it okay if I went ranty on this one?
I think it's fine. I think it's really good. I think you are speaking from your experience in all of this, and I'd like to kick it over to the person watching or listening right now. So you've been watching or listening along. You haven't had a third microphone. It's just been me and Antonia having this conversation. I'm sure you're having things you wish you could have said had you been sitting here with us as a third person. So we do want to hear what your perspective is on this. Where do you find persona showing up in your life? Is it something that you've got dialed in? You're growing, expanding. You don't have a lot of issue around it. You're working on it. You feel it's really, you have the proper persona for the context you find yourself in. Or do you struggle with it? Is it like a really hard thing and you feel like you've got to kind of lock down and control environment or control how people perceive you because you're worried about the judgments and all of that? What's your relationship with that? And then how do you think it relates to maybe shadow content in your life? If you could kind of explore your inner space and say, yeah, I can kind of see how this relationship between the way I showcase to the world, what I show the world, and some of the shadow material, I'm starting to see a relationship from that. We want personality types and these concepts to come alive in your life. So we want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com. Directly below this episode, leave a comment, ask a question. More importantly, share your story around some of these ideas. Your stories are great because they're compressed experiences. So come over and share your story. We can get a sense of how this shows up for you in real life.
Yeah, and thank you for letting me ranty. I agree. You said we have more of a persona problem, and I'm like, it's both, but I agree. I think it starts with persona. So thank you for letting me go in a little bit on my soapbox.
Yeah.
That said, if it wasn't too soapboxy for you and you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave us a rating and review on iTunes, it helps us out a lot, and I read every one. We're on YouTube. You could be watching this video podcast right now, and if you enjoyed this episode and it wasn't too ranty, you can like it, and you can also subscribe and hit the bell to let you know when new episodes come out. We generally premiere new episodes on Sunday morning. You can come join us. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating and review on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. And as Joel mentioned, we want personality types to come alive for you. We want you to benefit from them, help in your personal growth process, become the most you in a single lifetime you can. And we feel that personality types is one really important ingredient in that process. So head over to personalityhacker.com, and might we suggest you look at the Personality Owner's Manual for your type. This is a rich media program that dives into all the aspects of your personality type, including what's called your CAR model, your cognitive functions, and some of the phenomena that comes up by being a person of your type. And also it includes a toolbox of active things you can do in order to become the best version of your type. So head over to personalityhacker.com. I just had a bug that
almost flew in your mouth.
Just about flew in my mouth. That was not derailing. Head over to personalityhacker.com and check out that owner's manual.
Yeah. Thank you for being with us this week. If you think this would be beneficial to another friend of yours or a family member, would you consider introducing us to them and this podcast? We'd love to be part of not just your life, but the people in your life. I think we can really get these conversations started around how to become better versions of ourselves, how to interface with each other in relationship. And I just really appreciate you being one of our listeners or viewers at this podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. Hey, it's Joel from Personality Hacker. So a big reason people get into personality types is usually to improve their relationships with other people. And you can understand key differences between you and someone else when you understand how type works. So clearly, personality type is applied to relationships. But what about the relationship with yourself? Well, personality type can also help you navigate your career, or maybe an educational path that you need to follow, or other opportunities that present themselves. and it helps you know which are the right choice for you. And ultimately, personality is the key to unlocking identity-level worldview and life purpose. It all starts with getting the owner's manual for your personality type. In this owner's manual, we cover the basics of your personality. And then we dive a layer deeper to connect your personality to your relationships, your career, your worldview, and identity. Because we believe it's your life, and it should be designed for your personality. So start your owner's manual journey at personalityhacker.com. When you access your owner's manual, I recommend focusing on the ideal day exercise first. Because when you start crafting your ideal day, you're being mindful about the type of lifestyle that you want. So designing a life around how you're naturally wired makes sense, and you can finally stop fighting yourself. So come discover and develop your unique personality at personalityhacker.com.